Hi, this is Kerry Artak with Wicked Stocks bringing you your weekly Mag 7 update. I'll be looking at weekly bar charts throughout, no exceptions to that. The first chart we're looking at is Alphabet Incorporated, symbol GOOGL. We have reached our objective, or are presently testing it, following the buy signal in September above this 3-year channel top that is now well below the market at 224.56. This 264.24 level, and I'll let you do the simple math here. We've got them shown here, A, B, C. We gapped above that actually on Monday morning. Our low 264.28, just above it. We can see 273.57 this week, and we can get snagged, if you will, in this zone for not only the week, but even through the rest of the year and perhaps fall away. I don't obviously have a sell signal right now. We will show this on a week-by-week basis. Certainly, if we were to close above 273.57 on Friday, just hold on to whatever long position you still may have, but until then, you may trim some of that long position if you did establish it in September based on that buy signal. This was a decent play. Was this 20%? Close to it. Not quite. Let's see. Yeah, about 20% move. I'm just doing the math in my head, and I have no idea how close to accurate I am. But here we are. This is an area where you can take some profits. If we close above 273.57, in fact, I think you should stay long anyway. Alphabet, we'll see what plays out here. At this stage, it's selling on weakness, selling on a sense that this market will turn away from here. Right now, that would be a settlement on Monday below 264.24, and then you may trim out of some of that long position. But until then, I'd say just hang in there because we could push through this area. There's nothing formidable about 273.57. It's just an objective where this market can grow exhausted for a period of time. The question is, for a week, for a month, for a quarter, it's tough to say. So at this point, you're selling on weakness. Let's move on to Amazon. I'm actually going to jump to the third chart and just show that we had the reversal last week with the settlement below the 216.06 channel bottom that had set up a possible lower 190s objective. Obviously, that was reversed last week with the settlement back above it. And so really what I'm pointing out here is 216.06 is still decent support. And I don't see a reason to sell Amazon at this stage unless we actually close below this low of 211.42 in the weeks ahead. This is not likely to happen this week, but if it did, then we would once again anticipate the low 190s. Right now, I'd say 216.06 is a solid buy if given the opportunity. Upside, Amazon is likely to push now back into this zone of resistance. 237.68 is the high settlement price all time that was put out back in January on the weekly chart. And then, of course, you've got 242.52. But I'm actually going to just zone in on the upper 230s. I think that is our aggressive up pivot through the rest of the year and into Q1. 238.58 to be precise is a mostly horizontal channel top that lines up well with the 237.68 high settlement price. This is a sellable zone of resistance. From here we can fall back into the low 210s again within 2 or 3 months. But if we do close above 238.58, that is your next buy signal on strength. And I think we can then anticipate this 268.38 3-year channel top. This is probably a 2 to 3 month play if we close above 238.58. Until then, we can top out in the upper 230s and fall back into the 210s within several months. Let's move on to Meta. Meta, very sloppy, but it's been holding nonetheless. This channel bottom coming off the April low at 728.54. That held last week's low pretty well. We gapped higher. Now we're testing this descending channel top. And 756.81 is the level. That is our up pivot. Our down pivot remains 728.58. 728.54, which I'll show here in a minute. But I'm actually going to erase 728.54 to sort of underscore and dramatize 756.81 as our aggressive up pivot. So far this week, the high is 755.75. We've come very close to reaching it. If we close this week, Friday, above 756.81, we have a 2 to 3 month buy signal to this 853.26 rising channel top. This is a 3-year structure that can contain buying well into 26. And yes, if we close above it, we enter a sort of new normal for Meta, but we're not there yet. If we close above 756.81, if you're not long Meta now, that's a solid buy signal, I think, through the rest of the year and into Q1. Within 2 or 3 months, we should see 853.26 where we could top out into later 26. Until then is a bit of a battle between 756.81 upside resistance and that previously shown, and here again, 728.54 support. If we close below 728.54, the market skews south. As we continue into Q1, we've seen precedent for a 2 to 3, 3 to 5 month sell-off, and I think that would be the risk if we close below 728.54 this week. This 535.14 formation wouldn't surprise me by the end of the first quarter of 26. Until then, it is a battle right now between 728.54 and 756.81. Once again, closing this week above 56.81 is go long into the 850s. On to Microsoft. Microsoft has been, consolidating kind of a back and forth between 509 and 511, but I'd mention above 511, which we've been for the last month and a half, you can anticipate the 541.70 channel top again, and it lines up nicely with a near-term 2-month structure. 541.70, solid zone to sell this week, can contain buying through the rest of the year. This is a long-term channel top in its own right. We only pushed through it on an intra-week basis back in July. We never closed above it. And if you want to call it a range up to 567.60, I don't have a problem with that. No, though, if it's a 3 to 5 week swing trader, if we close above 541.70, that is a go long up to 567.60. And this structure actually held the highs nicely back in July. It can continue to contain quarterly, possibly annual buying pressures. And as long as we're below this formation that we've already tested, the risk is to the downside long term. Microsoft needs to close above this 5-year channel top at 567.60 to set off a significant buy signal through the rest of 26, but we're not there. Downside, what is our next sell signal? I would probably look at something like this, just a simple channel structure, 508.37 this week. If we were to close below it, we fall into the upper 460s within 2 to 3 months, but we're nowhere near that right now. At this stage, I will go back to this chart and just say above the low 510s, as I've been mentioning now for weeks, this 541.70 in reach, where if you've been long for the last few weeks, you can take some profits here at 541.70, closing above 541.70, expect 567.60 again within a matter of 3 to 5 weeks. On to, let's see here. I just covered Microsoft, didn't I? Yes, I did. Let's move on to Apple. Apple I cover every week at our wickedstocks.com subscription platform. We give a very detailed analysis of Apple, a 10-minute video roughly every single week. But this is broad brushstroke, and I'm going to backtrack. We tested the 195.72 5-year channel bottom in April. At that time, I mentioned how the 279.52 5-year channel top should be considered in reach over the following year or two. And we're about 7 months into this rally. So this is pretty amazing. We've seen them like this before, but this is pretty extensive. Last week, we closed above that December high of 260.10. This after having closed a couple of months ago above the 243.32 former channel bottom. When we did close above the 243.32 channel bottom, I'd mentioned how 279.52 should be considered a 2 to 3 month target. And we're about 6 weeks into that 2 to 3 month objective now. With last week's settlement above 260.10, we're probably 3 to 5 weeks away from reaching 279.52, where we could top out through the first quarter. This is a profit-taking zone on all time frames, whether it's the last couple of months above 243.32 or the last couple of weeks above 260.10. This is an area where you want to trim some of that long position because it just might contain buying well into 26. Downside, if we close this week back below 260.10, I think the 243.32 formation likely within a few weeks, where we could bottom out through the rest of the year, and above which 279.52 remains a 3 to 5 week or a 2 to 3 month a target above 243.32, 3 to 5 weeks now above 260.10. Let's move on to Nvidia. Which chart do I want to start with? I want to start with this chart here. This is just a reminder that we are bullish into Q1 above 173.93, anticipating 219.64, the full wave count. I'll let you do the simple math there. January high, April low. You flip it on its head. 219.64 has been an objective for some time and remains a 2 to 3 month target above 173.93. This is a solid zone to buy into through the rest of the year, and above which 219 219.64 2 to 3 month target. If we were to close below 173.93 in the coming weeks, then we pivot south through the rest of the year. 148.25 likely within a month or two. Until then, we're bullish in pretty much all time frames above 173.93. And in fact, last week we put out a buy signal by closing. Actually, this is a few weeks ago. This 182.05 suffices, though. If you watch our daily Nvidia report, we fine-tune this with other channel structures on the daily chart. But I'm using this just for illustration purposes. The low of the high was never closed below. And so it is still a decent base of support, 182.05. This is kind of our near-term outlook now. Above 182.05, we're expecting 200.81. We might see that this week, but I'm calling it a 2 to 3 month objective, rising next week to 202.87. This can contain monthly buying pressures, and we can fall away from here. But if we close above 200.81, we're probably just another 3 to 5 weeks away from reaching our overall 2 to 3 month target at 219.64, which remains in effect above 173.93. I just don't think we're going to see 173.93 anytime soon. This following a buy signal that doesn't show here at 182.05. I'm going to move on to Tesla. So we've got a 5 to 8 month buy signal, and it's just a guess that occurred back in September above 364.02, expecting a 526.25 as our overall objective. That remains in effect. Inside of that, we have a midterm resistance at 485.61. For those of you who trade the 1 to 2 month kind of time frame, 485.61 is still an important resistance area. I do think it's likely to be reached again over the next few weeks. I'll just have you watch the daily Tesla report on our free YouTube channel to get the sort of the fine tuning of that. 485.61 able to contain monthly highs, and from here we can fall away back into the 360s, 370s within a matter of a month or two. You've got 371.40, which is a rising channel bottom, and of course 364.02 I just showed. The question of whether we test 371.40 anytime soon comes down to whether we close this week below 413.49, and that's not going to happen. That is the low settlement price that was put out a few weeks ago, about a month and a half ago. Holding above 413.49, I do expect this 485.61 formation over the next few weeks, I would say, where we could top out into December and fall away again. The funny thing is this is rising at such a steep pace that by Christmas, it converges anyway with our overall objective at 526.25. So, as time goes by, this will become noted as a range of resistance. When we tested it back in September, it was in the 450s, 460s. Now we're in the mid 480s. So, I do think our ultimate target is 526.25, where we could top out well into 26. And it has been an objective since the September buy signal above the 364.02 formation. If you watch our daily Tesla report, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Last thing I'm going to show is the SPY. We did last week for the first time close above this 5.5-year channel top, but not by the required 1% margin. Now, we are pushing through the 1% margin on Monday. The week is young. If we can close above that 1% point, later in the week, then we have a significant buy signal through the rest of the year into the first quarter. I will show that target in next week's Mag 7. But I'm illustrating this because the week is young. We could fall away from here by the end of the week. And if we close back below this channel structure, then we have, actually, I call that a sell signal, an aggressive one through the rest of the year. And I'm showing this as a teaser. You can get this exact numbers, the 1% violation thresholds, our targets and everything by going to wickedstocks.com and taking advantage of our 5-day free trial, where you'll have all this information at your disposal. Once again, if we close above this 5.5-year structure in the S&P 500 at the end of the week, by that 1% note, we enter a long-term broader market buy signal that should have obviously be consistent with everything I've shown here in terms of upside potential on all these stocks. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going to leave it at that, rather, for this week's Mag 7 update. You have a great week.